So I've squandered way too much time debating whether or not I should talk about David Mitchell's views on atheism, or directly respond to his views, like an open letter. But finally, after the better part of a morning and several cups of tea, I've decided that it should be both. That I should start by talking about his views and then directly respond to his views. So yeah, I'm talking to you, David. That is, should enough people tweet this at you to get your attention. But I'm also talking to all those who currently share your views on atheism, and so even if this video fails to find you, it will still serve its purpose. This is David Mitchell Doesn't Understand Atheism. In 2012, Mitchell published his autobiography by the title Backstory, and like pretty much all of his work, I thoroughly enjoyed it and found many segments delightfully insightful and extremely funny. In fact, before I move on, I want to make it abundantly clear that despite the criticisms that follow, I'm truly a massive fan of his work, to the point that he's genuinely my all-time favourite comedian. His use of angry logic and sharp wit is brutally hilarious. In fact, so much so that I've simply got to share a relevant clip with you.
This is Matthew. When we were 9 years old, we co-founded an atheists club.
David's team. Who would you like to start with?
Richard?
Yes.
Atheists Club?
Yes.
Well, there's an obvious question, isn't there? At what point did you decide to lie about your atheism just to earn money from the Church of England?
Now, after seeing just this clip, let alone any of the ones in which he obliterates other pseudoscientific nonsense, such as horoscopes and homeopathy.
For 6 months, I wrote horoscopes for a women's magazine.
Doesn't know anything about star signs, nothing that would make them go, David's the man.
No, I
because
shouldn't be doing
you
it.
are quite articulate.
They should have got a qualified charlatan, but no.
Slowly.
Excuse me. 2 more homeopathic lagers, please.
Whoa, that's strong stuff.
One could easily make the assumption that he describes himself as an atheist, but he doesn't, and unfortunately, it's because he doesn't understand what atheism is.
You know, I'm not personally annoyed by atheists, but a lot of people assume I'm an atheist and sort of draw no distinction between being an atheist and an agnostic. And there's a sort of, particularly among, you know, basically rational comedians like me, there's a lot of atheism going on, and I don't accept the argument that atheism is the most rational response to the world as we see it. I think agnosticism is.
This criticism of atheism, which, as I'm going to show, is a criticism of a straw man of atheism, is the crux of Mitchell's confusion. But before I address it, here's how he expressed the same sentiment but in greater detail in chapter 19 of his book.
What I don't understand is why so many people, the religious and the irreligious alike, have swallowed the idea that atheism is the most rational conclusion to draw about humanity's position and state of grace. Even those who oppose atheism do so in terms of its being too rational, lacking imagination or faith. Just because there's no actual reason to believe in something doesn't mean it can't be there, they say. But atheism isn't the most rational approach. Agnosticism is. You can't know, so it's irrational to say that you do. An atheist or religious observant might counter that agnosticism, saying you don't know if there's a god or gods, isn't a conclusion at all. They'd have a point. But in that case, I say it's irrational to draw a conclusion. We don't know and we can't know.
So to respond, David, you are of course correct when you say that those who assert that they know for a fact that no god or gods exist are being irrational. But here's the thing, that's not what atheism asserts. Atheism is merely the observation that the claims of theism have not met their burden of proof, just as fairyism is merely the observation that the claims of fairyism have not met their burden of proof. To put it clearly, theism and atheism address what you believe, while Gnosticism and agnosticism address what you assert to know. And so if I ask you, do you believe in a god, and your answer is no, then you're an atheist. And if your answer is, as is the case with yourself, I don't know, then you haven't answered my question. You either believe or you do not believe. That is, you're either a theist or an atheist, and how certain you are of your belief, that is, how Gnostic or agnostic you are, is a completely different question. And so since you don't believe in a god or gods, you are, just like myself and Dawkins, an atheist. Granted, you're far more agnostic than us, because we regard the existence of a god with the same level of agnosticism as we do the existence of fairies, but make no mistake about it, you are an agnostic atheist, David, and that's why so many identify you as such. Now you might want to counter me by asking, who's to say what the definition of atheism is? Why is the definition that you've just presented more valid than the one that I use? But in response to this, I have two answers. The first is that the word theist, which comes from the Greek word theos, literally means God, and the prefix a literally means without, and so the word atheist literally means without God, not there are no gods. And the second, and far more important, is that it stands to reason that the definition of an endorsed label should accurately describe those who identify by it. And since the vast majority of atheists use the definition that I've just presented, this at the very least makes it the definition that critics should address, lest they want to commit a strawman fallacy.
Atheism also requires a leap of faith, albeit a nihilistic one. It might as well be a religion. Many of its adherents evangelize about their philosophy and beliefs as much as the religious do. They claim their opinions to be certainties. They viciously criticize those who believe otherwise. They are, in some cases, emotionally attached to the idea that there's no God and dislike being gainsaid as much as a pope or an ayatollah does.
This, again, is born of your misconception of atheism. The reason that I, for example, so furiously oppose religion actually has very little to do with the fact that I'm an atheist. It's because I recognise that beliefs inform actions, that actions have consequences, and that the consequences of religious beliefs often are deeply and unnecessarily devastating. Or in other words, it's because I'm a proponent of secularism and the scientific method. Look, at the beginning of your autobiography, you expressed that.
You've probably guessed that all things New Age tend to make me raise a sceptical eyebrow. And a sceptical fist, which I bang skeptically on the table while wryly starting a skeptical chant of fuck off, fuck off, fuck off, before starting skeptically to throw stuff and scream, you can shove your trendy scientifically unsubstantiated bullshit up your uncynical anuses.
Which, I must say, is a sentiment and reaction that I equally share, and from what I can tell, it's for precisely the same reasons. As you've pointed out before, New Age nonsense isn't just nonsense, it's dangerous, because if someone tries to heal their child with, say, crystals rather than medicine, then the result has a fair chance of being devastating. But this is also true of religion, and I would argue even more so, because it's shielded by not only the religious, but by otherwise rational and skeptical people like yourself. People have, and continue to, pray for their children's health rather than seek medical help. My point being is that if you replace the word New Age with religion or God, then you've got my position exactly.
They then wrap up this annoyance as anger at the terrible suffering religion has brought to the world, as if they truly think it's the religious beliefs themselves, rather than humanity's inbuilt urges to kill, persecute and suppress, that led to the Crusades, or the Troubles, or the failure to address the AIDS pandemic. Don't they get it? Humans will always find an excuse. The avowedly atheist communist states of the 20th century killed greater numbers than any regimes before or since and needed no religious justification. A politically ideological one served just as well. Humans don't kill or boss each other around or say sex is evil and should be controlled, or that certain people are wicked and should be oppressed, or that certain clothes are inappropriate or compulsory because of their religious beliefs. We do it because some of us want to, and religion is a convenient excuse. Atheists are being incredibly naive if they think that, in the absence of religion, other reasons won't be found for disguising violence as virtue, or indeed that atheist belief systems aren't just as potentially susceptible to murderous extremism as any of the religions they oppose.
Now, I've got to be honest, David, this is by far the most stupid thing I've ever heard you sincerely say. Seriously, I don't know where to start. If this is what you really believe atheism asserts, or at the very least what most atheists think, then it's you who's being incredibly naive. In fact, no, you're being incredibly obtuse. I mean, what atheists have you met in order to muster this outrageous straw man of us? Seriously, have you even had a conversation about atheism with a self-described atheist? First and foremost, and as you actually said, the communist regimes of the 20th century were the result of political ideologies, and so why exactly you added the word atheist is baffling. Why didn't you also add the word a-fairist or a-footballer? That's right, because a lack of believing in fairies and a lack of playing football had fuck all to do with it, just as atheism had fuck all to do with it. Sure, the leaders may have been atheist, and their ideologies may have necessitated atheism, but that doesn't mean that these reprehensible regimes were somehow inherent, or a consequence of, a lack of belief in a god, and you're more than smart enough to know this. To make it clear, what you've done here is commit a fallacy of division. You've implicitly asserted that something true of a whole is also true of one of its parts. That because these regimes caused millions of deaths, and because these regimes necessitated atheism, atheism caused millions of deaths. Which is as fallacious as asserting that because Nazi Germany caused millions of deaths, and because Nazi Germany necessitated European and Western Asian heritage, European and Western Asian heritage therefore caused millions of deaths. And secondly, I don't think I've ever met an atheist who's so naive as to believe that without religion, humans would all of a sudden cease extorting, exploiting, and murdering one another. Now don't get me wrong, I'm sure one exists, because the world is full of stupid people, theists and atheists alike. But I know for certain that most atheists wouldn't make such a silly assertion. We're quite aware that with or without religion, good people would be doing good things and bad people would be doing bad things. But we recognise that if you want a good person to do a bad thing, such as oppose equal rights, then religion is a surefire way of achieving it. So there's my response to you, David, and to all other agnostics who share your current misconceptions. In truth, I doubt you'll ever watch this, but if you do, and you're both willing and able to respond, then here's my email. I'd genuinely love to read or hear your response. And again, despite this disagreement, know that I'm a huge fan of your work, and that I sincerely hope that your happiness and career continue to prosper. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and to those of you who have donated via PayPal. Without your help, videos such as this almost certainly wouldn't exist. Stay rational, my fellow apes. Stay rational.